My child, do not move past this moment too quickly, because what you are about to hear carries the weight of something that has been building quietly behind closed doors. Pause here, even if only for a little while. Something has shifted around the person your heart has been unable to forget, and the change did not happen gently. For a long time, there was a truth sitting beneath conversations, beneath silence, beneath every unfinished sentence your soulmate wanted to speak but could not bring themselves to release. You may have felt it without knowing what it was. You may have wondered why certain moments felt unfinished, why certain words seemed to stop just before becoming honest, why your intuition kept whispering that there was more happening than what you were being shown. And now, in this fictional spiritual story, heaven draws your attention to that hidden place, because the silence surrounding it is beginning to break. There is a reason your spirit may have felt restless lately. There is a reason thoughts of this person may have returned at strange moments, even when you were trying to focus on something completely different. The emotional atmosphere around them has changed. Something that once felt controlled has become difficult for them to contain. The secret they carried was not simply a sentence they were afraid to say. It was connected to choices, loyalties, fear, and a third party who believed the truth would remain buried forever. That third party became comfortable because they thought time was on their side. They believed silence had already won. They believed your soulmate would continue protecting the situation by avoiding confrontation. But what they did not understand was that silence can only hold back truth for so long before the pressure becomes heavier than the fear of speaking. Your soulmate has reached a point where pretending nothing happened has become more painful than finally admitting what did. That is the shift no one expected. The third party sensed it before anything was even said. They noticed the distance first. They noticed shorter conversations, delayed responses, less emotional access. They noticed that your soulmate stopped defending certain things as quickly as before. They noticed questions beginning to appear where obedience once existed. They noticed your soulmate looking backward, remembering details they had once ignored, connecting moments that had never made sense at the time. And whenever someone begins putting forgotten pieces together, the person who benefited from confusion has every reason to become nervous. For weeks, perhaps longer in the world of this story, your soulmate had been carrying an uncomfortable feeling they could not explain. At first they blamed exhaustion. Then stress. Then timing. They told themselves they were overthinking. But the feeling returned every time your name entered their mind. It returned when they remembered the way certain people spoke about you. It returned when they recalled warnings they had accepted without asking enough questions. It returned when they thought about decisions they made while believing they had the full picture. And slowly, painfully, they began to realize something: they may never have been given the full picture at all. This realization did not arrive dramatically. It came in fragments. One remembered conversation. One contradiction. One comment that no longer matched the facts. One strange reaction from the third party when your name was mentioned. One detail your soulmate suddenly understood differently. Then another. Then another. And that is how the hidden story began opening. Not all at once, but piece by piece, until avoiding it became impossible. Your soulmate began wondering how many of their choices had actually been their own and how many had been influenced by fear, incomplete information, or someone else's agenda. The third party noticed those questions. That is when their confidence started changing into anxiety. They had once believed your soulmate would never challenge the version of events they were given. They assumed old misunderstandings would remain frozen forever. But something happened that shifted the balance. Your soulmate heard something they were never supposed to hear. It may have been a small remark, almost accidental, yet it opened a door that could no longer be closed. Suddenly, one part of the story no longer matched another. And once your soulmate noticed that contradiction, they began looking more closely at everything. That is where the panic truly began. The third party understood that your soulmate was no longer accepting easy explanations. They could feel the questions becoming more specific. They could sense that vague answers were no longer enough. And perhaps the most unsettling thing for them was this: your soulmate was no longer asking because they wanted reassurance. They were asking because they already suspected the answer. There is a great difference between those two things. A person seeking reassurance can often be calmed. A person seeking truth has already begun walking away from illusion. My child, you may have believed that your soulmate forgot everything you shared. They did not. Certain memories became quiet, but they never disappeared. In fact, those memories are now becoming part of the reason this hidden situation is unraveling. Your soulmate has started remembering things about you that directly contradict what they were encouraged to believe. They remember your patience. They remember occasions when you could have exposed someone but chose not to. They remember how you behaved when nobody was rewarding you for kindness. They remember your restraint. They remember moments when your silence was interpreted as weakness, when in reality it may have been dignity. These memories have become uncomfortable for your soulmate because they force a difficult question: if you were truly everything others implied, why do their real experiences with you tell such a different story? That question is changing everything. The third party knows it too. They know that once your soulmate begins trusting personal memory over outside interpretation, the old narrative becomes fragile. That is why their energy has become desperate. They are trying to understand how much your soulmate knows. They are wondering what has already been uncovered and what remains hidden. They may even be watching carefully for signs, studying the smallest change in behavior, because fear makes people notice details confidence used to ignore. But your soulmate has become unusually quiet. And that silence is not weakness. It is preparation. There was a time when they would have reacted immediately. There was a time when they might have confronted the third party emotionally, giving them enough information to prepare a defense. But now your soulmate is moving differently. They are thinking before speaking. They are watching. They are comparing old stories with new evidence. They are replaying conversations in their mind. They are recognizing patterns. And they are realizing that one particular secret sits at the center of everything. This secret is not simply about whether someone liked you or disliked you. It goes deeper. It concerns the reason certain choices were made. It concerns why distance was encouraged. It concerns what your soulmate was told at a time when they were emotionally vulnerable. And most importantly, it concerns the possibility that someone knew far more about your soulmate's true feelings for you than they ever admitted. That is why the third party is frightened. Because your soulmate may soon reveal that their connection to you never ended in the way everyone assumed. They tried to move forward. They tried to convince themselves that the chapter was complete. They tried to behave as though silence meant closure. Yet silence did not remove the emotional truth. It only buried it beneath routine. There were still moments when your name appeared in their mind unexpectedly. There were still places, songs, phrases, and memories that brought something back. There were still questions they never found answers to. And somewhere beneath everything they told themselves, there remained one feeling they could never completely explain away. They still cared. Perhaps more than they allowed anyone to know. The third party discovered this gradually, and that discovery changed their behavior. They began noticing whenever your soulmate grew distant during conversations about the future. They noticed certain subjects made them unusually quiet. They noticed that comparisons were happening even when nobody said your name aloud. Most of all, they noticed something that frightened them deeply. Your soulmate had never emotionally replaced what they experienced with you. That truth created pressure. And pressure created mistakes. The third party began speaking too much. Defending things nobody had questioned yet. Explaining details that did not need explanation. Bringing up your name in situations where your name had not even been mentioned. Sometimes fear reveals itself not through silence, but through unnecessary words. Your soulmate noticed. Each defensive reaction became another clue. Each attempt to control the conversation created another question. Then came a moment the third party did not expect. Your soulmate stopped arguing. They simply listened. That frightened them more than anger would have. Because anger can be redirected. Silence cannot. Your soulmate began gathering emotional clarity. They began seeing how much of their past behavior came from confusion. They began recognizing that perhaps they had been encouraged to misunderstand your intentions. Perhaps certain situations were described in ways that made you appear distant, difficult, or indifferent when the truth was far more complicated. Perhaps things you said were repeated without context. Perhaps your silence was interpreted for them before they had a chance to ask you directly. And now they regret that. Not with dramatic self-punishment, but with a deep private heaviness. The kind of regret that comes when someone realizes they made an important decision while missing important information. They remember a moment involving you that now feels completely different. At the time, your soulmate thought you were walking away. Now they are beginning to wonder whether you were protecting yourself. At the time, they thought your silence meant you did not care. Now they are beginning to wonder whether you were simply tired of proving what your heart had already shown. At the time, they believed someone else's explanation. Now they are wondering why they never asked you. That question has been following them. Why didn't I ask? Why didn't I listen? Why did I accept someone else's version of a person I knew personally? Those questions have become impossible to silence. And somewhere within that emotional reckoning, your soulmate made a decision. They decided the secret could no longer stay hidden. The third party does not yet know exactly when it will be revealed. That uncertainty is what makes their panic worse. If there were a specific confrontation, they could prepare for it. If there were an argument scheduled in advance, they could create explanations. But your soulmate has not announced their plan. They are holding it close. They have told very few people, perhaps no one. Yet their energy has changed enough that the third party can feel something approaching. In this cinematic spiritual moment, imagine the quiet before a storm that does not destroy, but clears the air. That is where this story stands now. Not in fear, not in chaos, but in the tense space before honesty enters the room. Your soulmate is realizing that hiding truth to maintain temporary peace only creates deeper unrest. They are tired of performing certainty when their heart contains questions. They are tired of allowing someone else to define what happened between you. And most of all, they are tired of pretending they no longer feel the consequences of losing your presence. There is something else. Something the third party may not know. Your soulmate has been thinking about contacting you. Not necessarily impulsively. Not necessarily today or tomorrow within this fictional narrative. But the idea has moved from impossible to imaginable. That alone is extraordinary because for a long time they believed too much had happened. Too much time had passed. Too many words remained unsaid. They feared what you might think of them. They feared you may have moved on emotionally. They feared that returning would require admitting mistakes they were not ready to face. But truth has a strange effect on fear. Once a person sees clearly, remaining silent begins to hurt more than risking honesty. Your soulmate is approaching that point. And what they want to reveal is bigger than the third party expected. They do not simply want to say, "I still care." They want to explain why they disappeared emotionally. They want to explain what they were told. They want to explain the pressure they were under. They want to admit what they believed at the time. They want to tell you what they later discovered. And there is one part of this confession that they have rehearsed privately more than once. It begins with an apology. Not a vague apology. A specific one. They want to tell you they are sorry for something you may have thought they never noticed. You remember that moment. Even if you rarely speak about it. A moment when you felt misunderstood and chose not to defend yourself anymore. A moment when you realized that explaining your heart to someone determined to believe a different version would only exhaust you further. You walked away from that moment carrying more pain than anyone knew. Your soulmate sees it differently now. And it haunts them. Because they finally understand what you were trying to communicate without saying it. You were not asking them to choose you blindly. You were asking them to know you well enough to question what they were hearing. That realization has changed something inside them. The third party cannot undo it. They can explain. They can defend. They can blame timing. They can say everyone misunderstood. But they cannot force your soulmate to forget what has now become obvious. Your soulmate has begun noticing that whenever they trusted their own memories of you, they felt peace. Whenever they trusted the fearful narrative around you, they felt conflict. That contrast became impossible to ignore. And now another hidden layer is emerging. Someone else may know the truth. Someone the third party did not expect. This person witnessed more than they ever admitted. They saw conversations. They noticed emotional manipulation. They watched your soulmate become confused. At the time, they remained quiet because they did not want to become involved. But recently, something caused them to reconsider that silence. And they said something. Only a few words. Yet those words changed the direction of everything. Your soulmate heard a detail they had never heard before. A detail involving the third party. A detail connected directly to you. For several seconds, your soulmate could not respond. Because if that detail was true, then one of the biggest assumptions they had carried about you was wrong. Completely wrong. They asked the person to repeat it. The person did. Then your soulmate asked, "Are you sure?" The answer was yes. That was the moment the atmosphere changed. Your soulmate did not explode. They did not cry immediately. They did not confront anyone. They became very still. Because when someone realizes their entire understanding of an emotional situation may have been built on a false assumption, the first reaction is often not anger. It is shock. Then memory begins rearranging itself. Old conversations return with new meaning. Expressions suddenly make sense. Timing becomes suspicious. Words once ignored become important. Your soulmate began remembering how quickly the third party discouraged certain conversations. They remembered how uncomfortable that person became whenever reconciliation was mentioned. They remembered subtle comments designed to make your soulmate doubt your sincerity. None of those moments seemed large by themselves. Together, they created a pattern. And your soulmate finally saw it. My beloved child, this is why the hidden secret is no longer safe in silence. Your soulmate has realized that remaining quiet would mean continuing to protect a story they no longer believe. Something inside them has become unwilling to do that. They want the truth spoken, not because they want revenge, but because they want freedom from confusion. The third party, however, does not know how much has been uncovered. They are panicking because they can feel control slipping away. They have started wondering whether your soulmate has already spoken to you. They wonder whether another person has shown messages. They wonder whether old conversations have resurfaced. They wonder whether evidence still exists. They wonder whether something they once said casually has now become the very thing exposing everything. And that last fear is closer to the truth than they realize. There is indeed something preserved. Something your soulmate recently saw. It was not supposed to matter anymore. It came from the past. But the moment they looked at it again, one detail stood out that they had completely missed before. A date. A phrase. A timing inconsistency. Something small enough to overlook years ago, but enormous once they understood what it meant. Their hands went cold. They read it again. Then again. And suddenly the story they had been told could not possibly be true in the way they had believed. That was the final piece. Or so they thought. Because just when your soulmate believed they had reached the center of the secret, another revelation surfaced, one so unexpected that even the third party may not know it has been discovered yet. And this new revelation is not only about what was hidden from your soulmate. It is about what was hidden from you. Something happened behind your back while you were still trying to understand why the connection had changed. Someone made a decision involving your name without your knowledge. Your soulmate has just learned about it. And what they discovered is the reason they are finally preparing to speak. But before they reveal the secret, there is one truth they must confront inside themselves first, because once they say these words aloud, there will be no returning to the version of the story everyone believed before. And the words they are preparing to say begin with your name. Your name was the first thing that crossed their mind when the final piece fell into place, and for several long seconds, your soulmate could do nothing but sit there in silence. Not because they had nothing to say, but because suddenly there was too much. Every memory they had tried to bury seemed to return at once. Every unfinished conversation. Every moment when you looked at them as if you wanted to explain something but no longer knew whether your words would be believed. Every time they allowed another person's opinion to become louder than their own experience of you. And now, with the truth beginning to form in front of them, they understood something that hurt more deeply than they expected. You may have been carrying the consequences of a decision you never even knew had been made. In this fictional spiritual story, heaven draws the curtain back a little further, because what your soulmate discovered was not merely another rumor. It was something that explained why the atmosphere around your connection changed so suddenly. Your soulmate had spent a long time believing that distance happened naturally, that perhaps both of you simply became overwhelmed, confused, or afraid. But now they were beginning to see that someone had quietly encouraged that distance. A third party had stepped into the uncertainty between you and used that uncertainty to influence what happened next. They did not need to control every conversation. They only needed to create enough doubt at the right moment, because doubt planted in a vulnerable heart can grow much faster than truth when nobody is willing to ask the difficult questions. Your soulmate remembers the period clearly now. There was a moment when they were emotionally uncertain about what you felt. They wanted reassurance, but they were afraid to ask you directly. That fear created an opening. Someone close enough to observe the situation noticed it and offered an interpretation. At first, it sounded harmless. A suggestion. A warning. Something presented as concern. Your soulmate was told not to expect too much from you. They were encouraged to believe that perhaps you had already emotionally moved away. They were told that protecting themselves meant creating distance before you could disappoint them. And because your soulmate was already afraid of losing you, they listened. But now they understand the strange contradiction. They were afraid of losing you, so they followed advice that helped create the very distance they feared. That realization has been sitting heavily on their heart. The third party never expected them to recognize it. For a long time, the third party believed the past was safely buried. They assumed your soulmate would never revisit the details because revisiting them would be painful. They assumed enough time had passed for memories to become uncertain. They thought if they repeated the same version often enough, it would eventually become the only version anyone remembered. But they underestimated one thing: genuine emotional memories do not disappear simply because someone tells a different story about them. Your soulmate remembers how you treated them. That cannot be rewritten so easily. They remember the small things you probably assumed they forgot. They remember the way you listened when they were struggling. They remember something you said during a moment when they felt uncertain about themselves. They remember your patience when you could have walked away sooner. They remember that you did not demand perfection from them. And now those memories are standing beside the things the third party claimed about you, and the two pictures do not match. This mismatch is where the secret began collapsing. Your soulmate went back mentally to one particular conversation. At the time, the third party had claimed to know something about your intentions. They spoke confidently, almost as if they had heard it directly from you. Your soulmate believed them because the details sounded specific. But recently, your soulmate discovered something important about the timing of that conversation. The third party could not have known what they claimed to know when they claimed to know it. The dates did not align. That tiny inconsistency opened everything. Your soulmate checked again. They replayed what happened before that day and after it. They remembered where you were emotionally. They remembered what had actually been said between you. Then they realized the third party's supposed certainty had arrived before the event they later used to justify it. In other words, What had once sounded like information suddenly looked like an assumption. Or worse, an attempt to influence. Your soulmate felt something inside them drop. Not because they instantly knew every answer, but because they knew they could no longer trust the old explanation. And when trust in one part of a story breaks, every other part becomes a question. The third party sensed this change almost immediately. Your soulmate's behavior became different. They were no longer interested in casual explanations. They started asking precise questions. When exactly did that happen? Who told you? Did you actually hear that, or did someone tell you afterward? Why didn't you tell me this at the time? These questions sounded simple, but each one placed pressure on a story that had survived largely because nobody had examined it closely. The answers became inconsistent. One explanation contradicted another. Then came the sentence your soulmate could not forget. The third party said something like, "Why are you bringing all of this up now? It doesn't matter anymore." But to your soulmate, that reaction mattered enormously. Because they had not accused anyone. They had only asked a question. Why become defensive if there was nothing to defend? Your soulmate did not say that aloud. They simply watched. And that was the moment the third party realized they might have made a mistake. From then onward, panic began showing itself in subtle ways. They started bringing you up unexpectedly. They tried to remind your soulmate of old disappointments. They emphasized moments when you had been distant while conveniently ignoring the circumstances surrounding those moments. They attempted to revive emotions your soulmate had already begun questioning. But instead of working, these attempts created the opposite effect. Your soulmate began defending you. At first, only internally. Then something extraordinary happened. During one conversation, the third party criticized a choice you had made long ago. Normally, your soulmate might have remained quiet. But this time they responded. You don't know why they did that. The room changed. The third party noticed immediately. It was a simple sentence, but it carried enormous meaning because your soulmate had stopped allowing assumptions about you to pass uncontested. The third party attempted to laugh it away. They said they were only trying to help. They reminded your soulmate that they had always been there. They may even have suggested that revisiting the past was unhealthy. But your soulmate was no longer listening in the same way. Something had awakened. Not obsession. Not revenge. Clarity. And clarity is difficult to manipulate. My child, your soulmate is beginning to understand that the truth does not require them to hate anyone. They do not need to destroy the third party. They do not need to humiliate them. They simply need to stop protecting a version of events that no longer feels honest. That is the spiritual turning point in this story. Your soulmate is realizing that forgiveness and truth can exist together. They can release resentment while still acknowledging what happened. They can move forward without pretending the past was something it was not. But there is still something they have not told anyone. Something involving their feelings for you. This is where the secret becomes more personal. During the period when everyone assumed your soulmate was moving on, they were still thinking about you far more often than they admitted. There were nights when they almost reached out. Messages were typed and erased. Your name was searched and then the screen was closed. Memories returned when they least expected them. Sometimes they wondered whether you were happy. Sometimes they wondered whether you hated them. Sometimes they imagined what they would say if the two of you ever stood face to face again. But they kept those thoughts hidden. Why? Because admitting they still cared would have forced them to question the choices they had already made. And questioning those choices would have meant questioning the third party's influence. So your soulmate buried the feeling. Or tried to. But buried feelings have a way of resurfacing when truth enters the room. Recently, your soulmate found themselves remembering something you once said to them. It was not dramatic at the time. Perhaps you barely remember saying it. But it carried a message they only understand now. You were trying to tell them that trust cannot survive if every outside voice is allowed to define the relationship. You were asking them, in your own way, to communicate directly with you. They did not fully understand then. They understand now. And that understanding has brought regret. Your soulmate has begun asking themselves what might have happened if they had simply come to you instead of listening to someone else's interpretation. What if they had asked you the uncomfortable question? What if they had given you the opportunity to explain? What if the two of you had spoken honestly before assumptions became distance? Those questions cannot change the past. But they can change what happens next. That is exactly what the third party fears. Because your soulmate has made a decision. They are going to stop hiding what they know. Not recklessly. Not in anger. They want to reveal it carefully because they understand that once certain truths are spoken, relationships will change. They are preparing themselves emotionally for that possibility. They know the third party may deny everything. They know excuses may appear. They know blame may be redirected toward you. They know someone may try to convince them they are simply becoming emotional about the past. But something is different now. Your soulmate has something they did not have before. Confirmation. Remember the other person who witnessed more than they originally admitted? Your soulmate went back to them. They asked another question. This time, they did not ask generally about what happened. They asked specifically about you. Did they ever say they wanted nothing to do with me? The witness became quiet. Your soulmate waited. Then came the answer. No. One word. But it shattered something. Your soulmate asked another question. Then why was I told that? The witness hesitated again. That hesitation told your soulmate there was more. They pressed gently. And what came next changed everything. The witness explained that you had actually seemed hurt and confused during that period. You were not celebrating the distance. You were not dismissing the connection. You were trying to understand why your soulmate suddenly changed. And according to this person, you had even asked what had happened. Your soulmate felt their heart sink. Because they had been told something entirely different. They had believed you were indifferent. But you had been asking questions too. Both of you had been confused. Both of you had been waiting for clarity. Both of you had been interpreting silence. And somewhere between those two silences, another person's version became the loudest voice. Your soulmate finally understood. The distance between you may never have been as mutual as they were led to believe. That realization brought tears close to the surface, though they tried to contain them. Not simply because they missed you. Because suddenly they could imagine your side of the story. They imagined you wondering why their energy changed. They imagined you noticing replies becoming colder. They imagined you questioning yourself. They imagined you believing you had somehow become unwanted without ever being told why. And for the first time, your soulmate truly considered how lonely that may have felt. That is the apology they are preparing. I should have asked you. 4 words. Simple. But behind them sits everything. I should have asked you before believing someone else. I should have asked you before assuming your silence meant rejection. I should have asked you why you were pulling away. I should have asked you what you were feeling. I should have asked you instead of deciding your truth for you. Your soulmate knows those words cannot erase what happened. But they want you to hear them. And that desire is making the third party nervous because your soulmate is no longer merely investigating the past. They are considering reopening communication. There is another reason. Your soulmate recently discovered that the third party knew they still cared about you. That may be the most painful part. The third party was not operating under the belief that your soulmate had completely forgotten you. They had noticed the lingering feelings. They knew your name still affected them. They knew certain memories remained powerful. And instead of encouraging honest communication, they apparently treated those feelings as something that needed to disappear. Your soulmate feels betrayed by that. Because advice presented as protection may have been motivated by something else entirely. Jealousy, fear, possessiveness, personal interest, or simply the desire to control an outcome. Your soulmate does not yet know which explanation is completely accurate. But they know enough to stop ignoring the pattern. And there is one question they intend to ask the third party directly. A question the third party desperately does not want to answer. Why did you tell me they had moved on when you knew they hadn't said that? Your soulmate has rehearsed that question. They know exactly how they want to ask it. Calmly. Without accusations. Without shouting. Because they want to watch the response. They want to see whether the answer comes naturally or whether another story has to be constructed. And strangely, the third party appears to sense this confrontation approaching. Their behavior has become unpredictable. One moment overly friendly, the next defensive. One moment insisting the past should remain buried, the next asking strangely specific questions about whether your soulmate has heard from you. That question exposed more than they intended. Have you been talking to them? Your soulmate noticed the fear beneath it. They responded carefully. Why would that bother you? Silence. There it was. A moment neither of them could escape. The third party attempted to change the subject. But your soulmate had already seen enough. Something about communication between you frightens this person. And your soulmate now wants to know why. My child, this is where the story enters a deeper place, because the truth your soulmate is preparing to reveal is no longer only about manipulation or misunderstanding. It is also about their own responsibility. They understand that blaming the third party for everything would be dishonest. They made choices too. They allowed fear to speak louder than communication. They accepted explanations without coming to you. They withdrew when they should have asked questions. And they are prepared to admit that. That is important. Because genuine reconciliation, whether it becomes romantic, emotional, or simply a moment of closure, cannot be built entirely on blaming someone else. Your soulmate knows they must own their part. They are beginning to do that. They looked at themselves recently and admitted something they had avoided for a long time. I was afraid. Afraid you might reject them. Afraid you might confirm the worst thing they had been told. Afraid that if they asked you directly, they would hear an answer they could not handle. So they chose uncertainty because uncertainty allowed hope and fear to coexist. But now they see what that choice cost. And that realization is giving them courage. Not certainty about the outcome. Courage. There is a difference. They do not know how you would respond if they contacted you. They do not know whether your heart still holds the same place for them. They do not know whether too much time has passed. They do not know whether you would welcome their explanation or simply listen and walk away. But for the first time, they are beginning to believe that you deserve the truth regardless of the outcome. That is why they are preparing to reveal everything. Yet the biggest secret has still not surfaced. Because while your soulmate was gathering answers, they found something connected to an old conversation involving you and the third party. Something neither of you realized had survived. A message. Not necessarily a romantic message. Not something dramatic on its surface. But it contains one sentence that changes the timeline completely. Your soulmate saw it unexpectedly. At first, they almost skipped past it. Then your name caught their attention. They read the sentence once. Their breathing changed. They read it again. Then they checked the date. That was when everything became clear. The message existed before your soulmate had supposedly been told that you no longer cared. Which meant the third party had information about your true feelings before giving your soulmate the opposite impression. Your soulmate stared at the screen. This was no longer simply memory against memory. There was something concrete. Something they could point to. Something the third party could not easily dismiss. And suddenly your soulmate understood why the third party had been so nervous about the past resurfacing. They knew this existed. Or at least they hoped it had disappeared. Your soulmate saved it. They have not confronted the third party yet. They have not shown it to anyone else. They are waiting. Because another thought entered their mind. If this message exists, perhaps there are others. Perhaps this was not a single misunderstanding. Perhaps there was an entire conversation they never knew about. So your soulmate started looking deeper. And they found another reference to you. Then another. Each one revealed a little more. Nothing sensational by itself. But together they painted a completely different picture of what was happening behind the scenes. And then they reached one final exchange. Your soulmate almost could not believe what they were reading. Because in that exchange, someone asked the third party a direct question about you. A question about whether your soulmate should be told the truth. The third party responded. Only one sentence. But that sentence revealed their intention more clearly than anything your soulmate had discovered before. Your soulmate stared at those words with tears forming in their eyes, because suddenly they knew the distance between you had not happened exactly the way they had believed. And now they know precisely what they must reveal to you. But there is something even more astonishing hidden beneath that final exchange, because the third party mentioned a promise your soulmate never knew existed, a promise involving you, their feelings, and the real reason someone wanted the two of you kept apart. Your soulmate has just discovered who made that promise. And when they saw the name, they whispered aloud. No, it can't be them. The name on that old exchange changed the entire meaning of what your soulmate thought they understood. For several moments, they simply stared at it, wondering whether exhaustion was making them misread what was right in front of them. They closed the message, opened it again, checked the date, then followed the conversation backward. But the name remained there. The person connected to the promise was someone your soulmate had never seriously suspected, someone who had appeared neutral whenever your name came up, someone who had allowed the third party to carry most of the visible tension while quietly knowing far more than anyone realized. And in that instant, your soulmate understood why certain events from the past had always felt strangely coordinated. This fictional spiritual story had just opened another door, and behind it was not the dramatic betrayal your soulmate expected, but something more complicated: fear, misplaced loyalty, private influence, and a decision made by people who believed they knew what was best without ever giving you or your soulmate the chance to decide for yourselves. Your soulmate's first reaction was anger, but it did not last. Beneath it came something heavier. Sadness. They began to understand that the secret was not simply about someone trying to keep two people apart. It was about how easily uncertainty can be shaped when honest communication disappears. Someone had apparently believed that your connection was becoming too intense, too emotionally significant, or too unpredictable. They feared your soulmate might make choices based on feelings they did not understand. Instead of encouraging a direct conversation between the two of you, they decided distance would solve everything. And the third party, for reasons of their own, became part of that decision. What none of them understood was that forcing distance does not automatically remove genuine emotion. Sometimes it only creates unanswered questions that survive much longer than anyone expects. That was the promise your soulmate had discovered. Not some supernatural vow written in fate, but a very human agreement: keep the situation calm, discourage contact, allow time to create separation, and eventually everyone would move on. At least, that was what they believed would happen. Your soulmate read the exchange again and felt their stomach tighten. Someone had actually written that. The connection would probably fade if communication stopped long enough. Another person responded that your soulmate simply needed time. Then came the third-party sentence, the one that changed everything: they would make sure your soulmate did not receive mixed signals from you. Mixed signals. Those two words stayed in your soulmate's mind. Because who had given anyone else the right to decide what your words meant before they reached the person they were meant for? Your soulmate suddenly remembered occasions when they had been told you were confused. They remembered being warned that contacting you might make things worse. They remembered someone saying you needed space, even though they could no longer remember whether you had ever personally asked for that space. They remembered how often information about you seemed to arrive through someone else rather than from you. At the time, they accepted it because they were emotionally exhausted. Now they saw the danger clearly. Somewhere along the way, communication had become a chain of interpretation, and every additional person in that chain had the power to change the meaning. The third party had known this. That is why their panic had become so intense. Your soulmate now possessed the very conversation that could expose how much influence had occurred behind the scenes. Yet strangely, your soulmate did not feel victorious. There was no satisfaction in discovering they had been misled. There was only grief for the time that could not be recovered. They thought about how different things might have been if one honest conversation had happened earlier. They imagined looking you in the eyes and simply asking, "Is this really what you want?" They imagined you answering in your own words instead of having your feelings translated by someone else. That imagined conversation hurt because it seemed so simple now. But heaven's message within this story is not that the past should become a prison. It is that clarity can arrive late and still matter. Your soulmate cannot change yesterday, but they can refuse to repeat yesterday's pattern. They cannot erase the choices they made while afraid, but they can choose courage now. And that is exactly what has begun happening. The person who once avoided difficult conversations has started preparing for the most difficult conversation of all. They are going to tell the truth. All of it. Not merely the part that makes them look innocent. That distinction matters. Your soulmate has decided that when they finally speak, they will admit their own mistakes before mentioning anyone else's. They will tell you they allowed fear to guide them. They will admit they believed things without verifying them. They will confess that there were moments when their heart told them to reach out, yet pride and uncertainty stopped them. They will acknowledge that you deserved a question instead of an assumption. And only after admitting their own responsibility will they explain what they discovered. That decision terrifies the third party because it removes their strongest defense. They expected your soulmate to become angry. Anger could be called irrational. They expected accusations. Accusations could be denied. They expected revenge. Revenge could make your soulmate appear unreasonable. But they did not expect accountability. They did not expect your soulmate to say, "I know I made my own choices, but I also need to know why you gave me information that wasn't true." There is nowhere easy to hide from a question like that. The confrontation finally came closer when the third party contacted your soulmate unexpectedly. Their tone sounded casual, but your soulmate could sense nervousness underneath every sentence. The conversation began with ordinary things, almost painfully ordinary, until the third party mentioned the past. They tried to make it sound accidental. Then they asked whether your soulmate had been thinking about old things again. Your soulmate became quiet. "Why do you ask?" The third party hesitated. No reason. But there was a reason. Both of them knew it. Your soulmate did not reveal what they had found. Not yet. Instead, they asked something much simpler. "Do you remember telling me they had already moved on?" Another pause. The third party said they remembered something like that, but not the exact conversation. Your soulmate's heartbeat accelerated. Because the old message was sitting right there. The third party remembered more than they were admitting. Your soulmate continued carefully. "Did they tell you that directly?" The answer did not come immediately. First came an explanation about how complicated everything had been. Then a reminder that everyone was emotional. Then an insistence that nobody had been trying to hurt anyone. Every sentence circled the question without answering it. Your soulmate asked again. "Did they tell you directly that they had moved on?" This time the third party said, "I don't remember." And your soulmate knew. Not everything. But enough. Because there are moments when uncertainty itself becomes information. If someone had confidently repeated your supposed feelings in the past, why could they no longer remember where those feelings came from? Your soulmate did not attack. They simply said, "Okay." That, okay, frightened the third party more than an argument would have. The conversation ended soon afterward, but neither person felt it was finished. The third party understood that something had changed permanently. Your soulmate was no longer asking questions because they were confused. They were asking questions to see whether the answers matched what they already knew. And they did not. Later that night, your soulmate returned to the old exchange. They read everything from beginning to end. This time, however, they noticed something they had overlooked during the first reading. The mysterious person whose name had shocked them had not actually initiated the plan. Their messages were hesitant. At several points, they questioned whether interfering was wise. They even suggested your soulmate should speak to you directly. That changed the picture again. The third party had apparently presented the situation as though everyone agreed that distance was necessary. But they had not. Someone had challenged it. Someone had said, in writing, that preventing communication could create a misunderstanding neither of you would be able to repair easily. Your soulmate felt chills at the accuracy of those words. Because that was exactly what happened. The warning had been there from the beginning. It was ignored. And then your soulmate reached the next message. The third party replied that direct communication would only complicate things. Your soulmate whispered, "Why? Why was honesty considered a complication? Why was allowing two adults to speak directly considered dangerous? Why was your voice something that needed to be filtered?" That question became the center of everything. And the answer was beginning to reveal itself. The third party had something to lose if you and your soulmate spoke openly. Perhaps emotional influence. Perhaps closeness.